The water came in at 3 in the morning. Not with violence, not with the roar that disaster movies have taught us to expect. It came quietly, a slow, dark intrusion beneath the door, spreading across the floor tiles with the patience of something that has been planning this for a very long time. The family was asleep. By the time they noticed, the water was already at their ankles. By the time they had gathered what they could gather, it was at their knees. They moved to the upper floor. In the morning, the water receded. They came back down. They dried what could be dried. They threw away what could not. They repaired the door seal. And then they stayed. This is not an emergency. This is a Tuesday in Kiribati. There are places on this planet that are in the process of disappearing, not metaphorically, not eventually in some abstract geological future that human minds cannot hold. Now, in the lifetimes of people who are alive today,
who remember when the water did not reach the doorstep, who can point to the beach that used to be there, to the coconut trees that used to stand where the ocean now moves. These places are being swallowed, and the people inside them are staying. The world has spent a decade trying to understand why. The answer it keeps arriving at, poverty, lack of options, government failure, insufficient relocation funding, is correct as far as it goes, but it does not go far enough. It does not reach the thing that the woman in Kiribati knows, that the fisherman in Loa Chara knew before the island finally went under, that the family in coastal Bangladesh has known for 3 generations of watching the land shrink. A place is not just a location. It is the accumulated weight of every life that has been lived there. It is the grave of your grandmother, the tree your father planted, the name your family has been called by for 200 years. When a place disappears, it does not just take the ground with it. It takes who you were. Consider for a moment what the ocean actually is. Not as a body of water, but as a presence in the human imagination. For most of history, the sea has been the edge of the known world, the place where maps stopped, the boundary that gave shape to everything inside it. Coastal peoples have always lived with a kind of dual relationship to that boundary. The ocean as provider, the ocean as horizon, the ocean as the thing that defines where home ends and the unknown begins. What happens when that boundary starts moving inward? When the edge of the world begins slowly to redraw the map of the world itself? Not through war, not through politics, but simply by advancing a few centimeters at a time into the space where home used to be. This is
the question that the swallowed cities are answering, whether anyone is asking it or not. There is an island in the Bay of Bengal that no longer exists. Loa Chara was, for most of recorded history, a small but inhabited island in the Ganges Delta of West Bengal. In 1981, approximately 10,000 people lived there. They fished, they farmed the rich sedimentary soil, they built homes from the materials the delta provided. They named their children and buried their dead in the same ground. By 1996, the island was gone, swallowed entirely by the rising waters of the Bay of Bengal, the product of a combination of natural delta subsidence and sea level rise that in the late 20th century accelerated beyond anything the island's geology had experienced before. 10,000 people gone. Not dead, but displaced, which is a different kind of gone. scattered across the mainland of West Bengal, in refugee settlements that still carry the names of the island they lost. The people of Lohachara have been on the mainland for 30 years. They still call themselves the people of Lohachara. The island does not exist. The identity persists. This is the first mystery of the Swallowed Cities, that a place can disappear entirely, and the people who lived there will continue to be from it, will insist on being from it, will pass the name to their children, who have never seen the ground it refers to.
The question that the Swallowed Cities are answering, whether anyone is asking it or not. There is an island in the Bay of Bengal that no longer exists. Like an inheritance of absence, a deed to a property that the ocean has repossessed. What does it mean to be from somewhere that is nowhere? The question is not rhetorical. For the people of Lohachara, for the low-lying island nations of the Pacific, for the coastal communities of Bangladesh and Vietnam and the Netherlands and Louisiana, it is the defining question of their existence. And the answer they keep arriving at, not in policy papers, not in international climate negotiations, but in the daily fact of their continued presence in the places that are consuming them, is this. It means everything. It means we're still here. Geographers have a term for what happens to communities like Lohachara's: forced displacement without conflict. It is a clinical phrase for something that has no clinical equivalent in human experience. War displaces people, but war has an enemy, a force that can, in theory, be resisted, negotiated with, or fled from with some sense of agency. The ocean offers none of that. There is no negotiation with sea level rise. There is no treaty to be signed with the tide. The displacement is total, and it is also, in a strange way, the most peaceful catastrophe imaginable. No explosions, no soldiers, no headlines on the day it happens. Just water where there was once land, on a morning that looks like every other morning, until it doesn't. The people of Lohachara did not flee a battle. They woke up one year to find that the battle had already been lost decades earlier, and nobody had told them it was a battle at all. In the Central Pacific, there is a nation that occupies 33 atolls scattered across an ocean area roughly the size of India. The total land area of Kiribati is approximately 811 square kilometers. The average elevation is less than 2 meters above sea level. The highest point on any of the islands is just under 3 meters. In the context of sea level rise projections, which now suggest that 1 meter of rise by 2100 is a conservative estimate, the arithmetic of Kiribati's future is straightforward and devastating. They are purchasing their own replacement, buying a new homeland because the original is being taken. And yet, the islands are not empty. The people are still there. Not because they do not understand what is happening. They understand it with a clarity that comes from watching the ocean eat their shoreline year by year, from seeing the freshwater lens beneath the atoll thinning as salt water infiltrates from below, from noticing that the storms that used to pass have started to stay. They understand. They stay anyway. Teodoro Tito, a former president of Kiribati, said something in the early years of the climate negotiation era that has never been improved upon. He said that the people of Kiribati do not want to be climate refugees. They want to be Kiribati. There is a distinction there that took the international community years to process, and that some parts of it have still not fully processed. The distinction is this: a refugee is defined by where they are going. A people is defined by where they are from. The moment the people of Kiribati leave Kiribati,
They may survive, but Kiribati ends. And Kiribati is not just a collection of atolls. It is a civilization, a language, a set of navigational traditions developed over 3,000 years of Pacific voyaging, a relationship with the ocean that is the oldest and most intimate in human history, a way of being in the world that exists nowhere else and cannot be transplanted to a highland in Fiji. When the ocean takes the last atoll, it will not just be taking land, it will be ending something unrepeatable. This is why they stay. There is something that must be understood about the navigational traditions of the Pacific, because they are central to what is being lost. For 3,000 years, the peoples of Kiribati and the wider Micronesian and Polynesian world developed a system of wayfinding that required no instruments, no compass, no charts, no satellite positioning. Navigators read the stars, the swells, the flight patterns of birds, the color of the water, the way clouds gathered above islands that were still below the horizon. This knowledge was passed from navigator to apprentice across generations, an oral library of the ocean itself, encoded not in books, but in the bodies and memories of people who had spent their lives on the water. Navigators read the stars, the swells, the flight patterns of birds, the color of the water, the way clouds gathered above islands that were still below the horizon. This knowledge was passed from navigator to apprentice across generations, an oral library of the ocean itself, encoded not in books, but in the bodies and memories of people who had spent their lives on the water. Navigators read the stars,
the swells, the flight patterns of birds, the color of the water, the way clouds gathered above islands that were still below the horizon. This knowledge was passed from navigator to apprentice across generations, an oral library of the ocean itself, encoded not in books, but in the bodies and memories of people who had spent their lives on the water. This knowledge exists because of a particular relationship between a people and an ocean, a relationship built on the assumption that the ocean is knowable, navigable, a space that can be read like a text if you know how to look. What happens to that knowledge when the ocean stops being a space you travel across and starts being the thing that erases the place you travel from? The wayfinding tradition does not disappear instantly, but its center of gravity shifts. It becomes knowledge about a world that used to exist, practiced by people who no longer have the islands the knowledge was built to navigate between. This is a second kind of drowning, slower than the first, and almost invisible from the outside. Not the drowning of land, but the slow submersion of an entire epistemology, a way of knowing the world that took 3,000 years to develop, and that may not survive the century that develops the technology to finally chart, with perfect satellite precision, the disappearance of the islands that knowledge was for. The city of Venice has been sinking since it was built. This is not a recent discovery. The founders of Venice, refugees from the mainland of the late Roman
Empire, fleeing the Hunnic invasions of the 5th century, chose the lagoon not because it was stable, but because it was defensible. They built on wooden piles driven into the soft sediment of the lagoon floor. They built on islands that were, by any reasonable engineering assessment, entirely unsuitable for urban construction. They built anyway, with a pragmatic genius for adaptation that would characterize the city for the next 15 centuries. Venice has been flooding since 1240, when the first recorded acqua alta, the high water that periodically inundates the city's streets and ground floors, was documented. In the centuries since, the flooding has increased in frequency, in duration, and in depth. The city sinks approximately 2 millimeters per year under the combined weight of its own architecture and the subsidence of the delta sediment beneath it. Meanwhile, the sea level in the northern Adriatic has risen by approximately 26 centimeters over the last century. These two numbers, subsidence and sea rise, are not additive. They are multiplicative in their effect on a city whose survival depends on their not being true.
And yet, Venice endures. Approximately 250,000 people live there and in its immediate surroundings. They have developed a relationship with flooding that can only be described as intimate. An intimacy born of centuries of coexistence with a force that could, at any time, decide to stop tolerating the arrangement. The Venetians have a word for it: acqua alta, high water. Not flood, not disaster, high water. The choice of language matters. A flood is an event. High water is a condition, something the city lives with rather than something that happens to it. When the acqua alta comes, the walkways go up, the rubber boots come out. The ground floors of shops are emptied of their lowest shelves. Tourists take photographs, pigeons relocate to higher ground. The city continues. There is in this a quality of defiance that is almost biological in its persistence. The refusal of a living organism to acknowledge that its environment has become incompatible with its survival. Venice is making the same calculation that the woman in Kiribati is making, that the fisherman from Lohachara made before the island went under. The calculation is not irrational. It is the oldest calculation human beings make. This is home. Therefore, it is worth the risk. MOSI, the acronym for Modulo Sperimentale Elettromeccanico, the massive flood barrier system now installed at the 3 inlets of the Venetian lagoon, represents the world's most expensive attempt to hold a city above water. A system of 78 mobile barriers hinged to the lagoon floor that can be raised to block the entry of the Adriatic during extreme tidal events. It cost approximately 5.5 billion euros. It took 14 years longer than planned to complete. It is already considered insufficient for the sea level rise projections of the late 21st century. Venice is buying time. Everyone involved knows it. The question that no one has quite managed to answer, not the engineers, not the politicians, not the philosophers, is time for what? For the city to find a permanent solution? For the world to reduce emissions sufficiently to slow sea rise? For the Venetians to accept, eventually, that the water will win? The water is patient. The water has always been more patient than the human beings who build beside it. There is a particular irony embedded in Venice's predicament that deserves to be sat with for a moment. The city is, by a wide margin, one of the most visited places on Earth. A destination so saturated with tourists that local authorities have, in recent years, begun charging day trippers an entrance fee simply to manage the crowds. Tens of thousands of people travel to Venice every single day specifically to look at it, to photograph it, to experience the particular beauty of a city built on water.
And the water they have come to admire is the same water that is ending the city. Every photograph taken in the Piazza San Marco during Acqua Alta, the famous images of tourists wading through ankle-deep water in front of the basilica, looking simultaneously delighted and bewildered, is, whether the photographer intends it or not, a photograph of the process by which Venice is disappearing. The beauty and the ending are not separate phenomena happening to coexist in the same frame. They are the same phenomenon, viewed from two different distances. Up close, it is a flood. From far enough away,
Across the span of centuries, it is the slow conclusion of a 1,500-year experiment in building a city where no city should be. In the Mekong Delta of southern Vietnam, the ground is disappearing in a way that has no precedent in the region's history. The Delta, one of the most fertile and densely populated river systems in Southeast Asia, home to approximately 18 million people, is sinking. Not because of sea level rise alone, though the sea is rising. Not because of subsidence alone, though the delta subsides as its sediment compacts. It is sinking because of a third force, one entirely of human making. The extraction of groundwater from the aquifers beneath the delta floor has accelerated subsidence to rates that were, 30 years ago, considered geologically impossible in this time frame. Parts of the Mekong Delta are now sinking at rates of 3 to 4 centimeters per year. In some locations, the land surface has dropped more than a meter in the past 2 decades. Meanwhile, sea level is rising, storm surges are intensifying, and the sediment that the Mekong River once deposited to replenish the delta, the sediment that built this land over millennia, has been trapped behind the hundreds of hydroelectric dams now operating on the river upstream
In China, Laos, and Cambodia. The delta is not receiving the sediment it needs to sustain itself. It is losing ground to the sea, and it is being pulled down from below. The families who have farmed this land for generations are watching their fields turn saline. They are watching the fresh water that their rice requires become brackish, and then salty, and then unusable. They are watching the fruit orchards that their grandparents planted die, one by one, as the saltwater intrusion reaches their roots. And they are staying. Because the rice was here. Because the graves are here. Because the name of this bend in the river is the name their family has carried for 100 years. Because leaving means becoming someone who is from somewhere that is not here. And that transformation, from person with a place to person without one, is a loss that the mathematics of climate risk
cannot fully account for. What makes the Mekong Delta's situation distinct from Kiribati's, and in some ways more unsettling, is the question of authorship. The atolls of Kiribati are disappearing because of a planetary process that no single nation caused, and that Kiribati itself, with its negligible carbon footprint, had almost no hand in accelerating. The disappearance is, in the bluntest sense, something that was done to them. The Mekong Delta's sinking is, at least in part, something that is being done. By upstream dams built for hydroelectric power, by groundwater extraction driven by the same agricultural intensification that has made the Delta one of the most productive rice-growing regions on the planet, by decisions made in capitals hundreds of kilometers away about energy and irrigation and development. The Delta is, in a sense, sinking under the weight of its own success. The very systems that made it so fertile, so
densely populated, so economically vital, are the systems now accelerating its disappearance? There is no clean villain in this story. There is no single dam, no single policy that can be pointed to as the cause. There is only an accumulation. Decades of decisions, each one reasonable in isolation, each one serving a real need, that together have produced a landscape now sinking faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. The families standing in their salt-damaged fields are not victims of a single event. They are living at the convergence point of 100 decisions made by people who never saw this delta, who will never see these fields, and who could not have known, or perhaps did know and decided the trade-off was acceptable, that this is where all those decisions would eventually arrive. There are places in this world that the water has already taken. They are not empty. They are remembered. They are carried in the name
families use for themselves, in the photographs kept in waterproof boxes, in the stories told to children who have never seen the ground the stories are about. The geography is gone, but the belonging persists, stateless and irreducible, like something that cannot be measured and therefore cannot be lost in any accounting. And there are places the water is taking now, slowly, incrementally, with the terrible patience of a geological force that has no concept of urgency, because it operates on timescales that make human urgency look like a brief agitation in an otherwise calm surface. In these places, people are making the oldest decision in human experience. Not fight or flight. Those are the options of an encounter with a predator, quick and decisive. This is something slower and stranger. The decision to stay in the presence of a force that cannot be fought and cannot be outrun, that will not arrive all at once, but will come, centimeter by centimeter, year by year, storm by storm, until one morning the water is at the ankle and then the knee, and the question of staying or leaving becomes finally urgent. Until that morning, they stay. Not because they do not understand the
Danger. They understand it with an intimacy that no satellite image, no climate model, no international report can match. They understand it because they have watched it happen to their neighbors, to their parents' neighbors, to places that were once land and are now water. They stay because the alternative, leaving, would mean becoming someone who once had a place and no longer does. And that loss, to the people who are living it, is experienced not as a lesser risk than the one they are staying to face. It is experienced as a different kind of death. The death of the self that was shaped by this particular ground, this particular bend in the river, this particular view of the ocean that is both home and threat, and the oldest thing they know. There is a final way of looking at all of this that is worth holding on to, because it changes the shape of the question entirely. We tend to frame the swallowed cities as stories of loss, and they are. But they are also, in a way that is easy to miss, stories about what survives loss. The people of Lohachara are gone from Lohachara, but the word Lohachara still means something, still organizes a community, still tells a child where their family is from, even though that place can no longer be visited. The knowledge of the Pacific. Navigators may no longer have the islands it was built to find, but the knowledge itself The way of looking at stars and swells and birds persists in the people who carry it, whether or not the destinations remain. What this suggests is something almost counterintuitive, that the thing being protected by staying is not ultimately the land. The land is, in the most literal sense, going. What is being protected is the continuity, the unbroken thread connecting the people of today to the people of yesterday, through the place for as long as the place can hold. When the place finally cannot hold any longer, the thread does not simply snap, it transfers. It moves into memory, into name, into story, into the strange permanence of things that have stopped existing physically, but have not stopped existing at all. The ocean is patient. The ocean has been here longer than the concept of home. It will be here after the concept of home has been revised beyond recognition by whatever the next century brings. But right now, at this moment, in a house in Kiribati where the water came in at 3 in the morning and has since receded, a family is on the upper floor. The children are doing what children do. The adults are doing what adults do.
The watermark on the wall is 2 centimeters higher than last year's watermark. They have noted it. They have not left. They are still here. And the ocean, which has no concept of courage and no concept of stubbornness and no concept of the unbearable weight of belonging to a place, continues to rise, 1 centimeter at a time, as it has always done, as it will do long after the last human argument about whether to stay or go has been settled, one way or another, by the water itself.